The title of Chapter 6 is Religion, Faith in God, Serpent Religion, Mystery Babylon, and Luciferianism. One religion originates with God, the other the serpent. Too simple? Remember Occam's razor blades, red pills and little books, difficult to swallow and harder to digest. Hard truth is seldom readily palatable. It tests our mettle, often asking us to abandon convincing rationalizations, to face things the way they are. When the veneer of religious pageantry, posturing, and complication is stripped away, truth becomes evident. Only one path leads to God, the uncreated creator of all things, the author of Eden. All other paths lead to God the serpent, contaminator of a once perfect Eden and God of serpent religion. That is a complex schmozzle of science falsely called evolution, humanism, and godlike claims, underscored with self-deification. Thus, true religion is revealed by the Spirit of God to man, and further confirmed by observation and reason. And false religion is revealed by the created to the created through intelligent observation and reason. In other words, the God of true religion says, "Believe me first, then I'll prove myself." He says man is not God and will not become God. Yet he promises to redeem man through Christ's work on the cross. Conversely, false religion says, "Show me the proof, then I'll believe." It says man can redeem himself through personal effort and become God or godlike. These two sets of beliefs are not compatible. The first emphasizes faith in God alone, and the second, faith in self and the serpent's promise. Purity of religion from God the Creator does not change, nor does it adapt or evolve, while the religion of the serpent changes, adapts, and allows the integration of all ideas that confuse the path back to Eden 1 and the foundation of the world. Serpent religion denies and affirms all things, insofar as they distort pure religion of faith in God, the Creator and Redeemer. Purity of religion is goodness, and impurity of religion is evil. The two have no fellowship. Only God, the uncreated Creator, is good. Thus God's nature must be, and is, the heart and soul of true religion. His sinless perfection is an immutable characteristic that only He possesses. Because of it, God alone is man's guarantee of pure religion, and no effort of man, or that of any other part of creation, can save him from sin. Pure religion is the work of God. It is faith in God. Adam and Eve first had pure religion. They trusted God, obeyed Him, and walked in perfect harmony with Him. Then corruption entered Eden. The serpent tempted Eve, and her faith in God was shaken and broken. She ate from the forbidden tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and gave to Adam, who also ate. Through acts of disbelief and disobedience, sin became their master. They traded pure religion of faith in God alone for impure religion, faith in lies told by the serpent. Because of this, Adam and Eve died spiritually and would later die physically. This new religion was, and still is, based on sin and death. Scripture says, "Sin equals death. God stated it from the beginning. If you eat of the forbidden tree, thou shalt surely die. Thus we have Eden 1, the creation of life, and the pure religion of faith in God alone, and Eden 2, the corruption of creation, the religion of death, and faith in creation. Throughout Scripture, and particularly in Genesis, two strains of faith are expressed in opposing pairs. Two trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Two choices, obedience and disobedience. Two sons, Abel and Cain, Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau. Two nations, Hebrews and Egyptians. Two kingdoms, Jerusalem and Babylon. Two paths, the narrow and the broad. Two eternities, heaven and hell. Two opposing forces, righteousness and unrighteousness. The first of each pair represents faith in God, and the second faith in the serpent. Scripture offers no middle ground. Of this Jesus said, "No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will love the one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon." Getting back to Eden 1 is by one path only. That is through faith in God. The other way, Eden 2, is certain death and eternal separation from God. Eden 2 marks the beginning of conflict on earth. The first act of war was rebellion against God, and it was declared when Adam and Eve chose to follow the serpent rather than God. They became enemies of their Creator when they believed the serpent's promise, "Ye shall be as gods." They yoked themselves with death and embraced the serpent's religion and his mandate to be like the Most High. Lies and deception became their primary offenses and defenses against the Creator, who is truth. After Adam and Eve disobeyed God and ate from the forbidden tree, they hid from God and lied to Him. Later, Cain murdered Abel and refused to answer God for his sin. Instead, he belligerently responded to God, "Am I my brother's keeper?" After that, we read in Scripture about the rapid moral decline of society before Noah's flood. Then, after the flood, Ham's sin against his father, Noah. Then man's defiance at the Tower of Babel. This trend of rebellion toward God continued up the corridor of time. And today, we observe a world equally wicked and steeped in inequity, war, and immorality. These are some of the manifestations of the spirit of conflict, found throughout history and evident in every society and nation, past and present. Man's conflict with man is because he is first in conflict with God, and man's conflict with God produces an earth fraught with corruption, violence, persecution, and injustice. Yet, the ultimate battle is not over temporal or material things. Rather, it is spiritual. Most of man's earthly striving is a deceptive distraction. Both God and the serpent care most for the souls of men, though their caring is diametrically opposite. God cares for their preservation, and the serpent cares for their destruction. God draws men to Himself by faith through the Spirit, the serpent through material desires. The material world is where man's conflict with God is most evident and demonstrated by his decisions and actions, the ultimate consequences of which are settled in the spiritual realm. If judged by works, all men are condemned. But if by faith, then are men pardoned. Through faith, conflict with God is resolved. All other ways are serpent religion and Luciferianism, and by them men remain forever at enmity with God, materially and spiritually. Faith in God alone overcomes the works of the serpent. Surely, this is not too naive or childlike. Yet, its very simplicity confounds the wise and intelligent that trust in meritocracy, but not grace, accomplishment, but not faith, and justice, but not mercy. Christ made clear the difference between false religion and true religion when he said, "Except ye be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven." A change in one's heart and mind must first take place. Faith must be redirected from the seen to the unseen, a faith no longer in man's wisdom and observable material evidence, but faith in God, who cannot lie. Childlike faith was broken when Adam and Eve consumed from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. They became wise in a way, but at the expense of innocent faith. They strayed from the plain truth of God's words. Yet, eating the fruit of the tree was not the first step of man's descent into darkness. Rather, the object of their faith and trust changed first. Then it was followed by disobedience. If at first there was no change of heart and mind, why choose at all? Why not reject the serpent's lie, walk away from the agent of corruption, rebuke him with the words of God, and let that be the end of it? Instead, they were enticed by the dark light that this new faith offered. To believe the serpent, they denied God. A clean line was drawn, and having a foot in Eden 1 and another in Eden 2 was not an option. To mark Adam and Eve's change from faith in God to faith in the serpent, God cast them out of Eden 1 and prevented them from eating of the tree of life. They were relegated to a life that would include toil and suffering. Certainly, Adam and Eve deeply regretted their choice, and through hardships were constantly reminded of the faith they once had and lost. A state of perfect communion with God and an ideal physical environment could not be easily forgotten. Surely, the serpent's idea of a better Eden had lost its appeal. Still, future generations remembered not Eden 1 and were soon fully immersed in the mysteries and liberties of the serpent. A world entrenched in self-gratification and carnal indulgence soon raged out of control, and every despicable thought and practice occupied the time of man. This is the kind of enlightenment that the serpent delivered. Every man doing as he pleased, gods in their own eyes. Eden 2 and its religion of faith in the serpent's promises produced only corruption, wickedness, and violence. His lying doctrine, "Ye shall be as gods, and I will be like the Most High," was and is the foundation of false religion. Despite this, a select few remembered God, their Creator, knowing that faith and trust in Him alone was their only hope of redemption from a corrupted nature and a deteriorating universe. The two religions, faith in Lucifer and faith in God, were further delineated. Mankind was divided into two groups: those who believed that God would judge the entire earth, and those who dismissed the idea. When the doors of the ark were closed and the rains came, there was no reprieve for those left outside. All who believed the serpent's promise perished, while those who trusted God survived to repopulate the earth. Yet the effects of Adam and Eve's rebellion were still felt by Noah, his family, and their descendants. Sin reared its ugly head, and the people of earth refused to spread out and replenish the planet as God had commanded. Instead, they gathered on the plain of Shinar to build a great city and tower. Here begins the legacy of Babel, or Babylon, the symbol of man-centered religions, false spiritual paths, and ritualistic worship inspired by the serpent. The religion of Babel, where most of humanity worships, is Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. It is a system recognized by half-truths, fabricated facts, myths, symbols, and false spiritual laws. It denies true history, pure lineages, and God's exclusive redemptive promise. It is driven by charismatic leaders, traditions, dogmas, philosophies, superstitions, and counterfeit versions of true religion. Mystery Babylon is the universal spiritual edifice where dwells Lucifer, and all people who reject the spirit of true faith and God's uncomplicated redemptive provision. From its elusive throne, the world is manipulated and its people kept in an illusory state, trapped in a kind of matrix where nothing is quite as it seems. The whole world cries for peace and prosperity, while those at the top of the pyramid with the power to cause change seem to thrive on deception, conflict, and inequity. And those at lower levels point the finger at the ubiquitous they, but often reflect the same values in their own lives. Mystery Babylon, in the broader sense, is compatible with the average person's worldview. It accommodates moral relativism, blurs the line between good and evil, and shifts personal responsibility and conscience over to religious systems and rituals. In a narrower sense, it is the religion of the Serpent of Eden too, a religion that amounts to little more than Lucifer worship, or self-worship as a representation or type of the serpent. In other words, every person trapped in the matrix of Mystery Babylon is an ambassador for the serpent, reflecting and promoting Luciferian ideals. In this context, the serpent presents two facets of himself. One is Lucifer the good, the light-bearer, and the other, Lucifer the evil, or Satan. From both moral and religious standpoints, one may identify with either what they think is good or evil, yet equally serve Mystery Babylon. Most people abide in what appears to be a gray area between polemic facets of Luciferianism, practicing some good and some evil, believing that if their good outweighs their bad, They are decent and moral people, and worthy of heaven. Yet many fail to understand that serpent religion equally accommodates both despicable darkness and brilliant light. It is a religion that thrives on confusing the incompatibility of good and evil, and ignores the fact that even the tiniest bit of evil in one's life renders one contaminated and unfit to abide in the presence of God. This presents a dilemma, especially for those who, for the most part, lead a reasonably moral life, yet make no firm religious declarations, and may be atheists and agnostics, demonstrating exemplary moral values. They rightly argue that many who identify with true religion demonstrate behavior that is morally inferior to those claiming no religion. And from that comparison, they may conclude true religion must be false. They insist that if any religion were necessary or true, then it should produce a better moral class of humans than does godless materialism. On the surface, this seems reasonable. However, all religions and non-religions embrace similar moral codes, true religion included, and the dividing line between true religion and false religion is not a set of behavioral rules and rituals. Rather, it is a thread of faith that follows an odd trail down through history and passes through the life and death of Christ, through the nation of promise, the sons of promise, and the Old Testament patriarchs of promise, to the very moment of creation and the Creator himself. True religion is faith in the Creator's righteousness. Thus, true religion of faith produces a moral life that is the evidence of faith, while a moral life does not necessarily produce faith in God. It most often traps one in the pursuit of personal righteousness, or trying to offset one's evil with good or penance, and thereby it guarantees false religion. Paradoxically, Jesus implied that a grossly immoral life is more likely to lead to true religion than a life of self-righteousness. The point he makes is that faith in God versus faith in personal behavior marks the first essential difference between the religion of Eden 1 and Eden 2. By faith in God and His words, Adam and Eve remained in perfect communion with God. And by turning that faith to the serpent, trusting his words, and acting on them, perfect communion with God was broken and redirected unto the author of confusion. So if by faith communion with God was first secure, and by faith the breaking of communion with God was accomplished, then by faith shall true communion with God the Creator be re-established. Within the pale of false religion, there are three moral departments that underscore various brands of serpent religion. They are that which claims the pursuit of good its true purpose. Number 2, that which is committed solely to the service of evil. And number 3, that which practices good and evil as necessary. These three distinct modes of belief produce variations of serpent religion, and the greatest possible number of religious paths within Mystery Babylon. Therein, every known ism can be classified as some kind of interaction or synergy between good and evil. Various explanations and justifications for good and evil are provided, including the denial of their existence. Yet individual adherents to serpent religion struggle to be free of their grip and attain enlightenment, deliverance, or salvation of some sort. This is true of all forms of false religion. The very struggle between good and evil is the means whereby the serpent sustains men's belief in fabricated cycles of evolution, reincarnation, penance, punishment, and purgatorial states. The hope is that eventually all rituals, processes, and tests will be passed, and a man may rise beyond constraints of good and evil to godhood, or in some cases, nothingness. Thus, serpent religion views the struggle between good and evil necessary for enlightenment, and therefore, in its overall effect, good. This accounts in part for the many atrocities committed throughout history by religious organizations and their adherents. I challenge the reader to name a single world religion not guilty as accused. Eliminate religion, the critics say, and most of the world's conflicts would be solved. To a degree, this is true, and oddly, Jesus agreed. He said, "A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit." He also said that false religion and its followers one day will be cut down and cast into the fire. Thus, serpent religion, embroiled in the battle of good and evil, itself producing both good and evil, is corrupt, and by that virtue must be false. It bears the fruit of its nature, and will not rise above itself, nor will those governed by its ideas of good and evil, behavior and morality, escape its grip through personal effort, or by mastering certain religious disciplines. Every person is born into serpent religion, Babylonianism. All are citizens of fallen Eden too, by birth and genetic inheritance. There are no exceptions. Sin is our master by nature. But for the empowering Spirit of God reaching down and plucking the free willing out of the grip of the serpent god, all should perish. And for the few who receive that gesture of grace and ultimate mercy, there is awareness of the harsh polemic of which I write. Things are the way they are because two opposing forces battle for the thoughts, actions, and souls of all men. Mystery Babylon is no longer a perplexity to those on the narrow path, holding on to the fine, unbreakable thread of faith that passes through Christ and back to the Creator. Much to the dismay of the serpent, the biggest secret of false religion is fully exposed by faith in Christ. That secret is that Lucifer is the god of the world and its religions. He is the Lord of Eden too, the author of enlightenment, creator of all brand name religions, and so-called spiritual paths of various makings. And struggle as sincere seekers of enlightenment may, they rise up the serpent's pyramid of lies and revelations, advancing only by self-promotion or encouragement by those illuminated elitists above them. Each lie, when satisfactorily assimilated and passed through, is another step upward into darkness, falsely deemed light, into the eye of Ra, the apex of Mystery Babylon. Ultimate enlightenment is no longer the horrifying revelation that Lucifer is their god, regardless of name or religious path. Most are unaware, and some never accept that they are on the Babylonian road. Rituals, disciplines, poses, attainments, secret knowledge, symbols, ethereal philosophies, costumes, and pomp and ceremony disguise the true character of Mystery Babylon, yet at the same time mark it for the whore that it is. How is this possible, you may ask? Simply, the whore appeals to carnal man, who judges by sight, preferring the golden cup of abomination to the rough, unattractive wooden chalice of the carpenter, who is Christ, the man of sorrows. The golden cup of abominations is full of self-interest and man's efforts of goodness and wickedness, while the carpenter's cup symbolically contains only the purity and perfection of Christ. One cup glorifies man's efforts and the other Christ only. Thus, two threads of faith, one strand tracing its path back to the serpent in the garden, that faith being man's belief in personal righteousness through knowledge to attain godhood in some form. The other thread of faith, representing death of self, denial of man's supposed goodness, and the replacement of it with the truth and the life and the righteousness of Christ by faith. One thread says the truth is within, waiting to be discovered and embraced. The other says the truth is without and must be received. One says the divine spark is within each person. The other says mankind is spiritually dead and must be reborn, made new. One is Luciferian religion, and the other pure God-breathed religion. Mystery Babylon is adaptable and has a voracious appetite for new ideas. It attempts to assimilate into its house everything of earthly and spiritual value. And though the physical Tower of Babylon, first built on the plains of Shinar, no longer exists, its spiritual presence did not die. Babylon lives on in the hearts and minds of billions of people, their religions, institutions, value systems, philosophies, and arts and cultures. Its goal in limited diversity? One world, one kingdom, one king, one religion. The total temporal and spiritual unity of mankind, first attempted at the Tower of Babel, is the ultimate expression of Mystery Babylon. It embraces all that will conform and eliminates all that will not. This is pure Luciferian doctrine, and the work of its visible representative, Mystery Babylon. Yet there is another complexity within the pale of religions. Luciferianism entwines itself with true religion, disguising itself as an essential strand of pure spiritual DNA. In other words, it grows within the defined fields of God-breathed religion, verbally expressing the correctness of faith-based doctrine, even feeding on the same spiritual nutrients, cleverly mimicking true religion, while in practice denying faith in God's goodness. It speaks the language of faith, but in action it re-sacrifices Christ and elevates man's works, making them necessary participants in the goodness of God's promise to redeem mankind. Jesus said of these deluded practitioners of veiled Babylonian spirituality, quote, "Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? And in thy name have cast out devils, and thy name done many wonderful works. And then will I profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity." Truly, Babylonianism seeks to infuse God-breathed religion with strange fire, incorporating ideas and plans that arise from the vanity of imagination. The wonderful works to which Jesus refers are the products of misapplied intellects, whereby workers of iniquity erect spiritual high places in their hearts and proclaim their noble accomplishments. Their many idols of self-glorification comprise the edifice of the universal deceived. That is the house of the serpent, whose proud residents are united by a strong delusion. Babylonianism extols the virtues of oneness, of unity at any cost, while true religion divides and separates as only absolute truth can. That which is evil cannot also be good, and that which is true cannot also be false. Yet Luciferianism, by synergizing its corrupt DNA with right-sounding religion, produces a deception of extraordinary refinement. One that, but for the works of the Spirit of God, would go undetected. Make no mistake, lest we forget the thrust of this exploration. The world is the way it is first because of deception and the will of the ubiquitous they that prefer lies to truth. The deception perpetrated by the serpent precipitated the fall of mankind. The lie believed is that through knowledge one can attain enlightenment or godhood. The truth is, only through God's goodness in Christ is salvation possible. There is no other way. Thus, we have expressed the heart of earth's two religions. Serpent religion is Lucifer-breathed and man-centered. True religion is God-breathed and Christ-centered. All men and women, regardless of path or religion, will face God and give an account for every thought and deed. There are no exceptions. But for Jesus Christ and faith in Him alone, all would perish. Chapter 7 of Solomon's Sorrow. The overall title of the chapter is Conditioning. The subtitle is Serpent Mind. We'll be discussing mind, sin, tolerance, brainwashing, cognitive bypass, new paradigm, education, and status quo. Serpent mind surrounds and indwells us, permeating every aspect of our lives. It has been that way since the fall of man. Amusement, fantasy, distraction, and idleness are some of the trademarks of Lucifer's kingdom, Eden too, and the mind tools of the serpent. Through the mind and emotions, the spirit of man is held captive, and that which dominates our thoughts and activities is the thermometer of our spiritual condition. Truth evident in reality is the condition where our thoughts, words, and deeds agree. Mental and spiritual instability are, in part, the products of one's internal world at odds with one's external world. In other words, the mind is split in two, one part working to sustain an internal dark fantasy world, and the other to present something often entirely different to the world outside. That is the double-minded man spoken of by Jesus. Sin is at its center, and the serpent's kingdom provides the sin nutrients and justification for an unhealthy duality to thrive in the life of a man. In turn, this feeds the shemazel we observe in the external world. In other words, that which we see around us, conflict, inequity, greed, and oppression, for example, is the product of sin and man's sin nature. And it is fed by the liberty and exercise of free will in conflict with God. So unless something inside us changes radically, the world around will remain the same or get progressively worse. Can conversion from corruption to perfection originate from within man? No. Corruption produces corruption. It's something we readily observe in the universe. The second law of thermodynamics. Non-living things do not produce living things. Life produces life. Mankind is dead because of sin. Man produces other corrupt beings like himself. Change must be effected from without. Eden 1, God's original creation, was perfect. It could not contaminate itself. Rather, an external agent infected it. Similarly, mankind was first corrupted from without, and now being corrupt cannot produce perfection. A foreign agent of perfection must affect that change. And who is that ambassador of good but God only? Though God condescended to enter the fallen universe for the purpose of man's redemption, he competes with the distractions and enticements of the serpent's kingdom, the strange opiates contained in Mystery Babylon's golden cup, addictive vices, greed, and deleterious associations hard to turn from. Every home today has a window into the serpent's lair. A tap on a screen or the click of a button opens up worlds of wonder. Everything the imagination can dream of. There we can belly up to the trough and gorge ourselves with the serpent's sin nutrients, essential spiritual poisons that, tragically, imprison and sustain most of mankind. A love relationship with the things of the world keeps men in bondage to sin. The latest movie, the next episode of a favorite television program, talk show gossip, celebrity news, sports idols, religious idols, the latest hit song, private cyber encounters, forbidden images, filthy language, violence, and secret wickedness too vile to mention. These are the stimuli that can split the mind, or help keep it split, of the average person, rendering it one part sordid and secret, and the other part a sanitized facade presentable to the external world, a hypocritical duality akin to madness, in my opinion. Yet, madness of this sort is perfectly acceptable within the pale of serpent religion. In fact, it is necessary. Conversely, the regenerate mind of the redeemed man is not driven by madness, rather by soundness. The spiritually mad mind thrives on ethereal philosophical concepts that often have little or no practical application in the external or real world. It is a mind filled with a mixture of lofty ideals and justifications for avoiding certain distasteful realities, particularly personal sin. It accomplishes this form of denial by merging good and evil into one synergistic force and theoretically denying objective truth. Yet, hypocritically, it demands objectivity in matters that affect its own gain and loss, and just and fair treatment in the material world. Morality and justice seem to matter when harm is done and personal reparation is demanded. Then is absolute truth called upon. However, the same mad mind, after receiving satisfactory moral justice or benefits from a particular situation, retreats to its convenient fantasy world, where vain philosophy rules and absolute truth does not exist. The very same mind that flip-flops between absolute and relative truth gives rise to the doctrine of so-called tolerance. Since the spiritually mad mind tolerates its own contradictions and affords itself the luxury of all manner of indulgence, it feels it must extend the same to others. But that extension is primarily intellectual or theoretical. It plays out very differently in the real world. For example, when a mad mind exercising its tolerance rights inhibits the tolerance rights of another similar mind, they accuse each other of intolerance. Tolerance becomes a one-way street. Evidence of this is plainly demonstrated in the public arena, where certain groups are expected to tolerate things they find despicable and contrary to their conscience and firm moral convictions. Tolerance advocates will not tolerate or defend the tolerance rights of those who will not tolerate perversion and sexual immorality. Tolerance has become the politically correct buzzword among so-called intellectually and spiritually enlightened individuals. They embrace the doctrine of tolerance in principle and at least verbally, but in fact, if push comes to shove, these same individuals, when acting in the external world, are aggressively intolerant of anything that diametrically opposes their world view. Tolerance as a politically correct worldview is most often a justification for certain sins in the lives of individuals. The primary topic of tolerance doctrine is sexual morality and rights. It is the mantra chanted by those who defy traditional values of sexuality, marriage, and family, and they are intolerant of those who stand immovable on such traditional moral values. The second area where tolerance is promoted as a noble philosophy is among certain religions. Coexist is the mantra, and it means everybody's right and nobody's wrong. Yet I submit that that principle of tolerance is not graciously extended to everyone. For example, if you believe there is one God and only one religion that worships that God, then you will not be tolerated. There is only tolerance for religions, philosophies, and ideologies that fit neatly into Serpent religion. And Serpent religion does not tolerate the God of Genesis, nor does it tolerate any religion claiming to be the only way to God. Tolerance doctrine cannot tolerate absolute truth and morality. So I ask the questions: who decides what is tolerable and what is not? Who and what are the final authorities? Or does each person decide for himself or herself? It should be obvious to any thinking individual that tolerance doctrine is the recipe for mayhem. Tolerance in the politically correct sense, if taken to its logical conclusion, will produce anarchy and lawlessness. Need I remind the informed reader that Aleister Crowley, the 20th century father of popularized Satanism and witchcraft, said, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole law." Crowley was a sexual pervert, a homosexual, a pedophile, a drug addict, and a practitioner of child sacrifice. Not someone you would trust or tolerate around your children. Yet, if the doctrines of moral and religious tolerance are true, what right does anyone have to deny Crowley and others like him the right to practice their morality and religion? If tolerance were a true doctrine, then it would be deductively true for everyone. Because of that, I submit that Serpent ideology is primarily philosophical and not practical or realistic. It's a bit like playing football with goalposts that are constantly being moved at the whim of the ubiquitous they. Things become unsettled and the game pointless and frustrating when elements that were reliable and consistent cease to be. It is true that society functions best when firm moral boundaries are set, immovable, and readily enforced. Without absolute morality and objective truth, the world will quickly deteriorate into a cesspool of crime, debauchery, immorality, and wickedness, as we see it has. It becomes a playground for the amoral, immoral, lawless, and wicked. I'll tell you another secret. This is a tactic of the Serpent's kingdom and his agents of corruption. Their motto, plainly stated and in clear view, is Ordo ab chaos. Order out of chaos. For this to be fully implemented and realized, the traditional moral fabric of society must be undermined, and man's innate sense of right and wrong brought into question. From this state of uncertainty, a new paradigm and a new order can emerge. The split mind facilitates this, a mind disconnected from reality and confused can be more readily manipulated and plied with new ideas. Because it has no firm standards or fixed boundaries, anything novel and enticing may be received without the barriers of firm biblical truth and morality standing in the way. That is why we are seeing the destruction of traditional values, the meteoric rise of globalism, the tearing down of sexual boundaries, the devaluing of the traditional family unit, the erosion of nationalism, and the emergence of a one-world government, religion, and economy. Mystery Babylon seeks the control of every aspect of life on earth, and for time it will have it. All who will not embrace its new paradigm will face extermination. The ubiquitous they establishes education, standards, and implements them, redistributes and assimilates wealth, eliminates borders, and reduces populations for the purpose of centralizing political, religious, and economic control. It is comprised of those at high levels of society, particularly educators, religious leaders, politicians, economic moguls, military leaders, and entertainers. Together, they control and shape the herd mentality. For example, in 1944, Manly P. Hall, prominent educator and occultist, wrote that within 5 generations, beginning with the youth through public education, the ubiquitous they would effect a change in the collective consciousness that would prepare society to embrace the New World Order paradigm. He said this would begin by changing the King James Bible, something the ubiquitous they had been working on for centuries. This, he maintained, would help prepare minds to accept liberal moral values, universal religion, a World Council table, and global policing. He wrote, "The way of that conditioning would be the one used in Central Europe to condition Nazi minds. There the circulation of an ideology began in public schools. We would have to have 5 generations of the consciousness concept of democratic cooperation before we can create a world capable of mental and emotional tolerance." Hall said that in 1944, most people still believed the King James Bible was a reliable, if not infallible, source of truth and absolute morality. And he said it needed to be replaced with something that was more inclusive, flexible, and allowed for a different morality. This accounts for occultist Hall's promotion of the Codex Sinaiticus, a Bible manuscript of which he said, quote, "Of importance to students of occultism is the fact that the Codex Sinaiticus contains many passages suppressed from the published Gospels, the King James Bible. These passages in many cases significantly alter the significance of the text. Today, all modern English Bible translations are based on Sinaiticus. According to occultists, the King James Bible, based on the Textus Receptus, was a Bible for the age of Pisces, while new translations based on Sinaiticus are Bibles for the New Age, the Age of Aquarius, and the New World Order. Earlier occultists like Madame Helena Blavatsky, circa 1831 to 1891, also endorsed Codices Sinaiticus and Vaticanus, particularly in respect to the Westcott Hort Greek New Testament, based on those same manuscripts. Blavatsky is touted as the mother of modern spirituality and the New Age movement. Today, the world we observe is a direct reflection of occult philosophy. Tolerancism, relativism, and occultism of sorts are bed partners. These three isms seem inseparable, and together they drive society deeper into the serpent's kingdom, feeding the darkest aspects of man's soul. This is evidenced by things that today the general public tolerates. Things that a mere 50 or 60 years ago would have caused an outrage. For example, in the 1939 movie Gone with the Wind, when Rhett said, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn," there was a negative repercussion for using vulgar language. Producer David O. Selznick was fined $5,000. Yet today's movies and television shows graphically promote promiscuity and use the filthiest language imaginable, and there is no significant outcry. It seems that the tolerance movement includes a liberal portion of desensitization, a searing of the conscience. Could it be that the ubiquitous they successfully changed the once objective moral backbone of society and replaced it with tolerance and moral subjectivity, that they successfully suppressed for the most part the true source of objective truth and morality, the real Bible? Could it be that Manly P. Hall's 5-generation plan is now nearly in place? Surely common culture, especially evident in America, is an expression of the successful reconditioning of society. Pop music and movies are proof, and they continue to be tools for influencing and conditioning young minds to accept the new paradigm. Media is a venue for learning endorsed by the ubiquitous they. It is education and indoctrination into occult philosophy, tolerance, and relativism. Instilling these values in each generation is one of the reasons big-name pop music concerts and videos depict occult rituals and feature numerous satanic symbols and hand signs, prominently featuring the all-seeing eye of Horus and the cornuto. This is most often accompanied by sexually suggestive choreography, featuring near-naked performers. Surely such creative choices can't be attributed merely to artistic license. I submit to you that everything in those live and recorded performances is carefully scripted and recorded and selected to promote aspects of the serpent's kingdom, and there is nothing wholesome or good about any of it. Content typically glorifies criminality, drugs, excess, vulgar language, sexual promiscuity, homosexuality, perversion, and occult rituals and symbols. A little time searching the internet easily produces some of the most offensive and vulgar material imaginable. I submit that anyone with the slightest sense of morality and decency has no business listening to such garbage. Yet couched in the guise of entertainment and art, these are the psychological and spiritual nutrients consumed by a world steeped in pop culture and vain distractions. They feed the brand of tolerance embraced by most adults and young people today, a tolerance that sees nothing wrong with things that, in former generations, were considered wicked and perverted. Exposure of any sort to information and stimuli is the beginning of education, and the ubiquitous they knows the power of this. The strongest indoctrination happens at the subconscious level. Cognitive bypass is the desired outcome. This is most readily accomplished through feelings, sensory massage and assault, and in extreme environments, sensory deprivation and pain. Sound and images, rightly applied in combination and at various levels of intensity and duration, are the most effective ways to successfully embed messages and new ideas into the subconscious, thereby avoiding the top level of intellect. In pop culture today, audio and visual media are the prime vehicles through which this is accomplished. When this form of mind conditioning is achieved, the victim, for lack of a better term, develops prescribed feelings that are triggered when other related information and stimuli are presented from different sources. The victim has no idea he or she has been programmed. They simply feel an affinity towards certain ideas, often attributing that to a spiritual awakening, an epiphany, or a déjà vu. This is the kind of education espoused by Manly P. Hall and the ubiquitous they. It is a form of mind control pioneered by the Nazis and further developed by the CIA. High-level occultists like Hall understand the importance of this. It is brainwashing by any other name. Once certain prescribed feelings are established, they can be easily exploited by later providing so-called facts that validate the things one is feeling. The victim can then make the connection between how he or she feels and the facts presented. For example, in Nazi Germany, a negative propaganda campaign was conducted against the Jews, and the Jews were blamed for the economic woes of Germany. This allowed many otherwise decent Germans to justify their growing hatred of the Jews. After all, the Jews were supposedly hoarding all the wealth and making everyone else poor. Therefore, it seemed reasonable for Germans to feel hatred toward them. When escalated, these false feeling-fact connections led many Germans to turn a blind eye and a deaf ear, while death trains openly transported innocent Jewish men, women, and children, among others, to concentration camps where they were exterminated. This kind of mindset is the end result of the method of Nazi conditioning that Manly P. Hall recommends. The purpose of New World Order education is to produce controlled thinking men and women, people programmed to believe, without serious question, fundamentals of the New World Order modern status quo, as follows. Number 1. Evolution is science, and it's true. Number 2. That which is labeled science is scientific. Number 3. Public education is an objective form of education. Number 4. All religions worship the same God in different ways. Number 5. Humans are basically good. Number 6. Tolerance is good, and intolerance is bad. Number 7. Homosexuality is normal and healthy. Number 8. Pharmaceutical drugs can be trusted. Number 9. Doctors are not to be questioned. Number 10. The government can be trusted. Number 11. War, the military, is a noble enterprise. Number 12. Network news, television, is a reliable source of information and truth. Number 13. Wealth and prestige are the measures of ability and success in life. And number 14. All who defy the status quo or believe otherwise are intolerant, narrow-minded, ignorant, unintelligent, and uneducated bigots. Serpent mindset is ensured in part by the status quo. Religiosity, social pressure, the love of money, and a false sense of security keep most people imprisoned psychologically and emotionally. Yet they think that the more respected that they are in society and the wealthier they are, the freer they are. Nothing could be farther from the truth. In fact, such things only fortify Lucifer's mind cage, making it even harder to get free of serpent religion. Jesus said, "Woe unto you, when all men shall speak well of you, and it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God." He is telling us that those who trust in wealth and things the world values are trapped in the status quo, and they have the spirit and mind of the serpent. The ubiquitous they control and manage the herd by enforcing the status quo, at times culling and eliminating those who attempt to retain the benefits of association with the system, but appear to go against it, especially those near the top of the pyramid. When anyone suggests the ubiquitous they is responsible for all manner of atrocities, they are labeled conspiracy theorists and kooks. Granted, some anti-status quo individuals find conspiracy where there is none. However, I'm referring to situations where there is sufficient evidence to question and reject the status quo. One need only scratch the surface to find evidence of many conspiratorial frauds perpetrated in the names of religion, science, medicine, justice, and safety. For example, the Jewish Roman trial and execution of Jesus, Roman Catholic Nazi ratlines, assassinations of Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy, fabricated evolutionary data, and the suppression of legitimate science that contradicts today's accepted cosmology, the Tuskegee syphilis trials, thousands of lawsuits due to harm caused by pharmaceutical drugs and fabricated data used to more quickly market drugs, the fact that top-level bankers and industrialists seldom ever face incarceration, even when caught in obvious financial and ethical fraud, and military invasions of foreign countries for the purpose of controlling natural resources, rather than claims of national security. Yet the charades played out on national news and network media typically portray even the slightest hint of conspiratorial overtones as the imaginings of crazy people, when in fact it's the other way around. Staunch upholders of the status quo, like big media, are under the influence of serpent mind and demonstrate an unsoundness of mind that cares less about truth and more about its perceived reputation and economic security. While many of those who make logical connections between corruption, money, politics, war, business, medicine, education, entertainment, and religion demonstrate a singularity of mind, caring for truth over personal gain, even unto death. For example, Fox's Book of Martyrs documents many historical examples of individuals and entire communities that would not submit or conform to the political, economic, religious status quo, knowing refusal would cost them their lives. For example, during the 1200s, Roman pontiffs dictated the status quo in most of Europe. Positions of political, military, economic, and religious power were guaranteed through papal loyalty. That meant unwavering obedience to the Roman pontiff and his dogma. Pockets of peaceful, law-abiding communities of all beliefs and ethnicities were brutally slaughtered for refusing to comply. Today, a gentler enforcement of the status quo prevails in most democratic societies, allowing for some latitude of personal conscience. However, the status quo is ever present and subtly applied through education and media that employ social pressure and conformity to control the masses. This manipulation of large numbers of people is evident primarily in two venues. One is mainstream culture, and the other, counterculture. Both serve the same purpose of shaping minds to conform to a herd mentality of one sort or another. They are sides of the same coin, serving functions consistent with an Hegelian dialectic that allows the status quo to change when necessary, but without compromising objectives. Status quo managed by Hegelian dialectic cares little whether we believe the earth is flat or round. For example, what matters is that we believe what we are conditioned to believe. It matters little whether tenets of the status quo are good, evil, true, or false. This kind of objectivity gives the ubiquitous they the flexibility to dictate thesis and antithesis, and thereby create the problem, provide the solution, and predict and control outcomes. Ultimate objectives are always the same. One world government, one world religion, and centralized control, management, and distribution of all resources by an elite few, the ubiquitous they. This is the heart and soul of the serpent mind and its desire for global dominance. It is the Luciferian matrix. Apart from Christ, all are trapped therein and will perish. And thus ends chapter 7 of Solomon's Sorrow.